Welcome back. T. Liggins, Hurdle Life Coach, here for another recap and discussion of the For Life episode series that airs on ABC. The For Life episode series, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a drama. It's about a real life story about an individual who was sentenced to life in prison for being a drug dealer. He was an owner of a club. He was convicted innocently and sentenced to life. While away in prison, he studied to get a law degree out of the state of Virginia, I believe it is, and then applied for reciprocity in New York, and ultimately became a inmate rep for individuals litigating cases looking to get their day in court again. Interesting day for me today. Actually, today marks 4 years to the day that I was released myself from federal prison, from federal custody. It's surreal to think about how much can change and how much has changed for me since spending my own time away as an inmate in federal prison. 4 years to the day I was actually released from federal custody, from federal prison. Fast forward my life, because of my decisions and choices to live a different type of lifestyle, to think differently, act differently, really surround myself with the right people, enter a life into recovery, whereby I no longer engage in any illegal drug use. I no longer participate in drinking alcoholic beverages. It's been 5 years since I've engaged in anything illegal, drug-wise, to cope or to sustain any type of normal, emotions and feelings that we go through as human beings. And again, even so, alcohol, put it down over 2 years ago. And I actively volunteer in the community. I have my own company. As you guys know, this is my company, The Hurdle Life Coach. I have a wonderful team that helps me guide this ship that I'm so grateful for. And along the way, I've been blessed, and I've been fortunate to get some good jobs and to have employers really give me a shot, a second chance, another opportunity to demonstrate and to prove that because you make a poor choice at a time in your life, that you're not redeemable, or that you can't be used again. And it's my own story and the story of others like me that just burns my fire every single day. I know it is possible to re-enter after a time away of incarceration with the right community support, with the right peer support, with the right family support, with the right community support, and absolutely be able to help people restore into community, into life, into family, and be contributors to society in a meaningful way. And so for me, participating in not only this work, but in this program is often very nostalgic for me. Really have a strong level of empathy for the individuals in this drama TV series and what they're going through and what they're experiencing. And so I'll jump into some of my initial feedback or insights of things that I noticed today, but I did want to be clear. Just in this moment, I hadn't had a chance to really declare it outwardly to anyone yet. So this is me bearing the news that actually today marks 4 years from my release from federal prison myself, and it is completely possible to re-enter, to not reoffend, to not go back to jail and prison, and to just become more and do something with your story, do something with your experiences. Everything in life is preparation for what is to come. And if I may, here on my platform, I'm going to say clearly, as you guys can see, I'm a man of faith, and man's choices does not change God's purpose. Man's choices does not change God's purpose. So no matter what your history is, no matter what you've gone through, no matter what you're going through, there's a plan for your life bigger than what you can understand or what you can see. And if you lean into that faith, you'll be amazed how far you can get with that. And I look back over my 4 years, and nothing but God, I have to say, but God, I've been able to get where I'm at today in life. So got my fours up for that, and I'm so grateful and humble to really make it this far. So let me go ahead and jump into some of my initial thoughts and stuff about the episode series. I think we're at about week 7. So I appreciate those who are continuing to come along this journey with me. Hopefully you're having a chance to actually see the episode too, and that you're not just maybe catching the live. If so, that's fine. But hopefully you're having a chance to watch it too, and you're able to just go along with me on this journey as we dissect what's going on. So a lot has happened over these 7 weeks. There's a lot going on with Aaron Wallace's case. There's a lot going on with his wife and the dynamics at home. And now there's a new inmate who's in a part of the equation now too, in Cassius, and he's really making a strong imprint on operations around the prison. And I think this series continues to do a great job of really to give us an insight on what is prison culture. And unless you've been there, it's really difficult to truly understand, and it's hard to explain unless you've been there, like all experiences. But this series does a great job of letting people in behind the veil of what it is that is going on within prison culture. And so really kudos to, Curtis 50 Cent Jackson for executive producing this and doing this for us, because I think it's important, because when we know what individuals are going through while they're in prison, we can better serve them and better support them when they come out of prison. If we as a community and a society can begin to better understand what they're going through while they're in prison, we can be in a better position to support them and help them when they get out of prison. Of course, we want to, not send so many people to prison and things of that nature, but since the system is designed the way it is and people are wired the way they are, we're going to continue to see people going into prison. So, people are going to continue to come out of prison. But really what this is about for me in the efforts with Hurdle Life is how can we best support people upon their release. So at the same time, again, great job of showing what the prison culture is like. And so Cassius, new inmate, shaking things up in there as well, intimidating the captain, sending goons to the man's house, really sending a message. And it's really fascinating to really see how, influence and resources and all these things can still be leveraged upon and used even while being an inmate in prison. So really, it's not about being an inmate, man. It's about being a person. So it's like you can believe or perceive a person to be nothing but a number, but every one of those individuals are more than a number. They're a person with means, with resources, with brain and ingenuity. And sometimes it's not used for good. That's the thing. We want to help people use those resources, that ingenuity, that intuition, that smarts, that intelligence, that leadership. We want them to use it in a positive way. But the unfortunate thing about prison culture is really there's not many ways to use this skill set in a positive way. And so it all ends up being funneled into negative behavior such as drug trade and drug trafficking. So that's what we're seeing. But from an objective standpoint, man, you're seeing the leadership skills of a Cassius and how he's, gathering support and creating buy-in and all these other things that are happening. And I think it's important, at least for me, I'm speaking for me, that I see it that way. I'm not excusing the behavior as negative, but I recognize, man, there's some potential there, and there's potential in every single one of the individuals that go into jail and prison that we can help redirect the skills and the attitudes and the courage and the bravery and the risk taking into positive, meaningful, legal ways of surviving and thriving. And so, just kind of saying that, kind of from a optimistic standpoint, all hope filled. But at the same time, Cassius he's grimy, and 50 Cent like playing grimy individuals. So again, prison culture is really being shown to show how that happened. So one of the things right away with that is you saw that Aaron Wallace was trying to get to the telephone, and all of a sudden there was a whole big, hurdles to getting there. And he said, it's like a phone bank. It's Cassius running the phones now. And because of how commerce works in prison with different like commissary or exchange for goods for value and stuff, not only does it cost the individual in prison and jail to use the telephone, people in jail and prison create systems on top of the system to end up exploiting people for even more. And if you don't comply with the demands of the power in prison, then you're met with force. You're met with intimidation. That's really what I wrote down in my notes, is that in prison they create systems of control, but it's all ran on intimidation and fear. And that is not good. That's not good, because now all of a sudden, when you're living in that type of environment, when you're operating in leadership with those types of behaviors, when that's what you use to influence, then you're not they're not being equipped to then return to society and lead with love and lead with grace and lead with patience and peace. They're being equipped because of the prison culture to lead with intimidation and fear. And that's something that is really a call to coaching, which is something that I do here at Hurdle Life, and that I'm building up others to do here as well at Hurdle Life, is to rewire that type of thinking, rewire that type of attitude, and not to accept or support leadership by fear or leadership by intimidation. But that's exactly what's happening in the prison there. They're leading by intimidation. They're leading by fear. One of the core parts of this story had to do with the individual who wanted to marry his wife. The wife was dying of cancer. I actually found myself really struggling to watch all of that through, thinking like, are they over dramatizing this? This is really getting dramatic. This is a drama for sure, because they're really pulling on the heartstrings with this story, being that, the guy's in there. Well, from my recollection, he's been in there 21 years at least. But for the last 13 years, the wife's been like battling cancer. Now she's got like 6 months to live, and he just wants to marry her. But there's all these hoops and ropes and barriers and hurdles to work through and to jump through just to engage in a decent moral behavior of connection with your partner, with your loved one, with your would-be wife. And so his story is at the center of all of this. Well, I think what really stood out to me, one of the things I wanted to talk about as far as like prison culture and something to think about, is when you saw him in his cell recording those messages and like, if this is the last time I'll get to see you, then I want to say this and I want to say that. And in his cell, he had all these pictures. And I remember this, and I remember going through this myself, and I'm not alone in it, because we have 2.3 million people locked up in prison right now in our country. And it's so sad actually right now what's happening in our prisons and jails, especially with the current state of our country being with this virus and this pandemic that's going on. If you're watching and seeing any of the articles that are being released about really the death trap that is now our prisons and jails, and how inmates and or individuals who are incarcerated and staff members are coming down positive with this COVID-19 thing, and people aren't able to social distance, and people aren't able to practice the necessary precautions to really secure life right? Here in our Constitution, it's like you have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But then in prison right now, people's lives are in jeopardy, and our country, our government, our people, we are not responding in a way to ensure a person's life. People are at risk of dying in our jails and prisons right now. And it bothers me because there's already an issue for mass incarceration. I know I'm off of the episode right now and on a different thing, but this is still Hurdle Life. And what we care about is prison reform measures and the way that individuals are treated in prison and when they come home. And so like right now in prison with this pandemic, we've got people at risk of losing their lives, and there needs to be a call to some type of accommodation being made. I don't know the solution. People are saying release people, whatever, do something. We can't not do nothing, because if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so people are at risk in prisons and jails right now. And to my point, what bothers me about this is that we already overly incarcerate people of color at a disproportionate rate. And we already know that our prison systems is like a modern day slavery. It's like the new age plantation. There's already the injustice of returning people back to involuntary slaves of servitude by punishment of crime that is already causing great damage to communities of brown and black people. Now you've got people at jeopardy of losing their lives while they're locked up. And I think as a community, as a society, as a government, we're just standing back with our hands up like, oh, well, this really feels wicked. It really feels scary. It's really a really challenging time right now in our country of what is moral, what is right, and what is just. And man, one of the hardest identities to have, I'll tell you right now, one of the hardest identities to have is being a person who's incarcerated in jail or prison, because you have a very, very, very limited amount of control. And I just think we ought to be mindful that there's some conditions going on around the country right now that we ought to be raising our voice and saying something about. So I just said something. Back to the episode a bit. I'm just talking about the inmate experience, or the prison experience. And so when you're in prison and jail, you live by and you get fueled by these pictures, and you see your children grow up in pictures, and you hold on to these pictures as memories. But what stuck to me, what was hard, is that in those pictures, time stands still. In those pictures, time stands still. And so while you're in prison or jail looking at these pictures, and in that moment and living in that time, things have kept going. Things are still going on the outside world. And so he's looking at pictures of his would-be wife, and she's healthy. She's happy. That's the light. That's who he sees. That's who he remembers. But the reality is completely different than that. The reality is completely different than that. And she's sick and ailing and dying. And it's like that for so many people, where they hold on to the innocence of their child, or they hold on to the goodness and harmony of their marriage and what it was when they went to prison. And then at times stands still, but it doesn't stand still for the outside world. And so there's a distortion of reality that the individual who's incarcerated copes with and lives with. That's also a challenge and a barrier upon their release, because now when you release and you see that time didn't stand still and things have changed, how do you cope with that? How do you navigate that? Where is the support to help people through those things? That's some of the work we do at Hurdle Life and providing that support. So the center part of one of the stories is this guy's story, and it's just sad to see what he was going through. You fast forward, you kind of see that it did kind of end well, that the warden, she stuck to her moral convictions, even though she was in back and forth dealing with the politics of having a wife who's running for attorney general, having the balance between having a son who is breaking the law, committing crime. Here she is, an enforcer of law and order. Even the wife, a would-be enforcer of law and order, But then you seen the interesting dynamic between them two, where one lady, the wife, wanted to use her privilege. The other wife, the warden, wanted to, really stick to accountability. And it unfolded in an interesting way. And here the series, really without saying it, talked a little bit about privilege. The warden said if that was a 12-year-old kid of color, he would have been on his way to juvenile detention. I think that's worth saying and putting out there into the world, because that's this criminal justice issue, this criminal justice challenge that we're dealing with is not just for adults, it's also for juveniles as well. And she said something so powerful. She said that if he was a 12-year-old boy of color, kid of color, that he'd have been on his way to JDC. And so that's something too. Although it's not all about that. What we want to do is really pull out all these different things that this series is showing us, and really what's happening in criminal justice with our juveniles and detention and diversion as well. We need to take a look at, because how are we treating them? How are we talking to them? What type of means and methods are we putting into place to support at-risk young people as well? Which is, again, with some of the work we're doing at Hurt of Life, it's not only adults in transition. We're also here to support at-risk youth as well with our diversion program. And it's so good to see my big brother Eric chiming in. I think you're out in Missouri, and much respect, much love. I appreciate you being here and shooting me some comments in here. Definitely love having you here. As you can see, I'm fired up about this because we know this. We see this all the time in Omaha. We've seen this in Omaha. And as I fast forward my life now as a full-time advocate for this work, this is not just my life, but the lives of many people that I know and that you know as well. Moving forward through, let me get through some of the rest of this other content. I talked about the politics. When the warden was at lunch with a county commissioner, goodness gracious, something else that was also said that was powerful. He said to her, while you're advocating for these criminal reform measures, people are trying to keep their jobs. People are trying to keep their jobs. And so that's one of the things that this come down to. And it's hard to think about what you should do, but it seems as if our country wants to keep the prisons open and operating so people can keep their jobs. Like, they're more concerned with people keeping their jobs than actually reforming individuals who are under their care and custody for rehabilitation, right? It's the Department of Correction and Rehabilitation. But it seems as if, and I remember hearing this while I was away, these people care more about their jobs than they do us. And here it is. This episode is like painting that picture. He's like, hey, warden, you here trying to, warden, you here trying to, advocate for reform or save people, help people. We trying to keep people jobs. And so this is what we're balancing. And I ain't saying that people should lose their jobs, but I'm definitely saying that we got to care about people as people. And the way that we treat individuals who go to jail and prison, and we don't treat them like people. We don't treat them like people. There's a lot of jobs out there we can do. There's a lot of things we can do in the world, besides corrections and confinement. I ain't saying we don't need to have corrections and confinement, but we are doing too much confining. And there's other ways that we can just provide these support, and you can use the same type of skill sets that you would use as a prison guard or something, doing something else, being a security guard somewhere else or something, whatever. But I just think that, again, he said, you trying to reform the system, we trying to keep jobs. That's what we're teetering against, y'all. That's what we're teetering against. That's what this is about. So it seems. And I'm leaning on the side of actually rehabilitation, reform, restoration, and let's call it justice, and not just politics. I talked about the pictures, talked about the 12-year-old. Another part of what was being discussed today is the thing about confidential informants. So Aaron has really got hope in the fact that he has discovered that one individual was a paid CI for the prosecution, and that that was never mentioned. So again, there was another act of manipulation or unethical behavior or lack of transparency, and he's feeling that, you know, the more he can discover those type of malpractices, the better chance he has at getting his case overturned. In fact, too, that reminds me, you know, at the top of the show, he says, trying to get my retrial. So many people live for that hope in prison. Like, they're just trying to get that appeal. They're trying to get that retrial. And that's what they're living for. And so, you know, that's what he's doing. That's what's keeping him going. That's how he's doing his time. So the CI is this guy Angelo or whatnot, and what he ended up discovering later in the episode was that CI had a history of being dishonest on the stand, you know, so essentially lying under oath or perjury. And the fact that the prosecution knew that this CI had a history of being dishonest, still used him anyway. So actually, in working through some of this episode with one of my team members, I actually was sent some information about CI's confidential informants that really makes this an area of reform that we can take a closer look at. And surprise, surprise, the culture and around confidential informants is one that's unregulated. And because it's unregulated, it runs wild, and it's now used in a way for a tool for the prosecution, but it runs such a high risk of distortion and manipulation that people are lying under oath, so much so there's even a culture around the term testifying instead of testifying. There's so much dishonesty because of the confidential informant who is intimidated and pressed to say whatever the state's attorney wants them to say so that they could get a deal or not get charged themselves. And so they're willing to say just about anything just to help the people get the conviction. And it's not regulated. And it is problematic. And kind of segueing from the unregulated industry of confidential informants, which is very dangerous to be a confidential informant, especially when you're discovered to be a confidential informant. But segueing from that, they talking about conviction. One of the things that was also said was that the dude said, "It ain't my fault Aaron was too stubborn to take a deal." So another piece of information that was sent to me talked about how, and I knew some of this actually, but 94% of state convictions are settled by plea deal, and 97% of federal convictions are settled by plea deal. By plea deal. And this doesn't necessarily equate to justice. So because the states and the federal government, they will load you up with so many charges. I mean, I'm thinking this through, and I know how it went down for myself and other people that I know that take those plea deals. I think about, you can be charged with just about anything. You can be charged for coughing and sneezing and blowing in the wrong direction in this country. There's so many things that are considered infractions or illegal behavior that once the government gets their hand on you, they just load you up with 15 charges, and then they add up the numbers on every one of the charges, and then it comes out to 75 years, and they tell you that either I'm going to charge you with all 15 charges and give you 75 years, or you can plead to this one for 5 to 7 years. We can go to trial, and we're going to charge you with all 15. You do the math. It's 75 years. Or you can plead out to these 1 or 2 charges. And they use that strong arm tactic all the time. And people are pleading out to deals and going to prison and jail. 94% of state convictions are settled by plea. 97% of federal convictions are settled by plea. And sometimes, again, people don't even feel feel like they're guilty of that in which they're being charged with, but they're too afraid to go to trial because of how much time they might lose if they go to trial and lose. And so then they take plea deals. And so that's just another thing to kind of consider or think about, if that's not common to you. Now you know and recognize that some of these tactics that are being used by our government to incarcerate people, and then to incarcerate them, why? With this prison labor stuff that's going on, and again, we've been talking a lot about family impact. We gotta really move into and lean into what are the alternatives to incarceration that we can get into. Fast forwarding a little bit, and I think wrapping up pretty soon here. We'll probably jumped on around 10:36. I can't. It's impossible to start right at 10:30. So bear with me for this 30-minute recap. I'm going to get wrapped up here. It was beautiful to really honestly see at the end of this episode. Oh, I should say quickly too before that is Aaron Wallace did such a great job of proving that the prison board did act arbitrary and capricious in their decision to not grant that guy's wedding. He did a great job of just unfolding. We continue to be able to see really what magic looks like in the courtroom, where you got to be on your P's and Q's. You got to be sharp. Got to have your I's dotted and your T's crossed to really be able to paint this picture to prove a point. And at the end of the day, he won that case and proved that the prison board did act in an arbitrary and a capricious manner, which just means really random, without any forethought, and not being consistent. They were not consistent in their decision to not grant the wedding. So then the wedding was granted, and at the end we were able to see such a beautiful thing occur. I know it seems like a small thing, but it's really it's something special. There's nothing small about individuals' lives. Individual life is big. Your life is big. My life is big, and little moments like that makes a big deal. And it is encouraging to see, at least on the TV series here. Hopefully, we can duplicate some of this in life. Just a little bit of humanity behind the walls, and we're allowing people to do things like have marriages and see their families and just move beyond treating people like animals and really treat people like humans. So really love seeing the spirit that was in the episode, the truth, the togetherness, the connection that was there. And it looks like things are really taking a turn for Aaron Wallace. He's coming to a point where he's ready to let go. He signed the divorce papers. I talked about in a couple of weeks ago how on average about 6 or 7 years, a relationship does fall apart. If you don't get out of prison within 6 or 7 years, the likelihood that you're going to have that wife or that husband upon your release is pretty slim, from what I've learned while I was away in that situation as well. Not that long, but for people who were, doing 12 and 13 years, 20 years in prison and jail, you lose your loved ones. And so it seems like it's taking a turn. Aaron Wallace is coming to a tough time a tough part of his life where he's going to let go, because he learned from that woman. She said, man, if I could do it differently, I would let go sooner. But I just held on to hope, but I didn't know it would be this long. And so then with the case kind of falling apart a little bit with Angelo disappearing, which was the confidential informant, and Aaron Wallace made that choice to adjourn his meeting a couple of days to do the right moral thing. He was encouraged to do the moral thing pro bono, and he kind of dealt with an unintended consequence from that. We're really hoping things turn around for him. He's able to find a way to make right on that. I don't know how his story ends, y'all. So I'm actually watching all this with you guys too. This was an opportunity presented to me by one of my team members who said this would be a great way for us to get our voice out there. So we're doing it. And so I'm on this journey with you all. So it's been good. I got a lot of passion about this. This is what I do. This is all I do. This is all I care about. This is what I'm called into the world to talk about. Criminal justice reform measures, specifically trauma-informed measures, and that individuals can be redeemed and restored upon their release from incarceration. Yes, I want to see more reform on the inside of the walls with education opportunities and real people behind the walls who want to see people get well and not just confine, control, and contain. I want to see some of that, but I'm so fired up about what we can do when people come home. We have so many people being released from jail and prison all across our country, and even here in South Dakota, around 4,400 a year. We got work that we can do, and now more than ever, we need to stick together and support one another. I mentioned earlier, let's raise our voices about what's going on in our prisons and jails with the COVID-19 issue, and that really being a death trap, a really high risk situation. But let's also just encourage each other in these times, to really see the good in what's going on, the togetherness, the ability to be able to stop and pause, be with people you love and care about, still be able to connect digitally and virtually. There's still some blessings in all of this chaos and confusion. So just wanted to send some encouragement out. Again, 4 years for your boy T. Liggins, the Hurdle Life Coach, today, out here doing the work, caring about people, caring about justice, not just criminal justice, but community justice. And so thank you all for being here. I don't know what my time is. I think it's about time. But shouts out to my big brother, Eric. You told me to give you a call. You got a plan for me, so I'm going to give you a call right now. Kiana, you keep supporting me out of St. Louis. I appreciate you. Looks like I got one of my cousins chiming in with the last name Liggins. And, of course, Cassie got my back and holding it down and sending some links in the chat. So next Tuesday, same time, y'all. For Life. Shouts out to 50 Cent for doing a great job with this, executive producer. We're going to do it next week. 9 o'clock is For Life. 10 o'clock, I'll be back here doing a recap and discussion until this thing is over. I believe it's a 12-week deal. And so I think we're on week 7, so we probably got about 5 more weeks to go. All right, y'all. Hurdle Life.